I am completely done supporting you. From now on, you will pay your own way, Sarah announced, slapping a crumpled grocery receipt onto the granite kitchen island. She folded her arms across her chest, lifting her chin with an unearned sense of authority. My son David stood a few feet behind her. He suddenly found the hardwood floor incredibly interesting, refusing to meet my eyes. The silence in the kitchen was heavy, but my heart rate did not rise. I did not gasp, and I certainly did not defend myself. I simply picked up my coffee mug, took a slow, deliberate sip, and watched the two of them. They had moved into my 4-bedroom home 2 years ago under the guise of saving for a down payment on their own place. Somehow, over those 24 months, Sarah had twisted the narrative. Because she occasionally purchased my preferred brand of oatmeal and restocked the almond milk, she had convinced herself she was keeping me afloat. I mean it? Catherine Sarah continued, her voice sharp and dripping with condescension. We are splitting all household costs from this exact minute forward. No more free rides. We are entirely done being your retirement plan. David finally glanced up, shifting his weight nervously from one foot to the other. He offered no defense on my behalf. He just gave a small, passive nod, dodging my gaze like a scolded teenager. I knew the exact state of my finances. I also knew how painfully ignorant they were of theirs. I set my mug down on a coaster, folded my hands, and looked directly into Sarah's impatient eyes. I think that is a very fair arrangement, Sarah, I replied, keeping my voice smooth and perfectly level. Good. We start today, she smirked, clearly believing she had just put me in my proper place. She spun on her heel and marched out of the kitchen, entirely blind to the reality of the roof over her head. She thought she was cutting me off, but she had just handed me the scissors. The very next morning, Sarah wasted no time enforcing her strict new regime. When I walked into the kitchen to make my morning tea, I found bright blue painter's tape physically dividing the pantry. She had claimed the top 4 wide shelves for herself and David, leaving me the narrow, cramped bottom rack near the floor. Inside the refrigerator, neon sticky notes were slapped onto everything from the butter dish to the orange juice, boldly declaring their exclusive ownership. David sat at the breakfast nook eating premium bacon, completely ignoring the neon gallery in the fridge. Instead of arguing about the sheer disrespect, I grabbed my keys and drove straight to the nearest home improvement store. I purchased a high-quality mini fridge, a heavy, solid brass door lock, and a stack of large, heavy-duty storage bins. Over the past 2 years, I had allowed them to slowly take over the garage and my downstairs guest room with their endless Amazon boxes, unused exercise equipment, and seasonal decorations. If we were truly paying our own way and separating our lives, it was time for a drastic boundary realignment. I spent the entire afternoon hauling their clutter out of my private spaces. I stacked their belongings neatly but firmly in the hallway right outside their bedroom door. I wheeled the new mini fridge into my bedroom and stocked it with my own groceries. Then I uninstalled my standard bedroom doorknob and replaced it with the heavy brass lock. When Sarah returned from work and saw her cardboard boxes barricading her doorway, her jaw dropped. She marched directly toward my bedroom to demand an explanation. She grabbed my doorknob and twisted hard, only to hit solid, unyielding metal. She rattled it again, muttering under her breath. She was just beginning to realize that I knew how to close doors too. Sarah assumed my new boundaries only applied to groceries and bedroom spaces. She was profoundly mistaken. For 2 long years, I had quietly washed their laundry, folded their towels, and deep-cleaned the hallway bathroom they use daily. Under our new independent living agreement, that complimentary maid service expired immediately. On Wednesday morning, I gathered only my own clothing and linens. When I walked down the hall and found David's sweaty gym clothes kicked casually into the corner, I did not sigh and picked them up as usual. I stepped right over them and kept walking. By Friday, their laundry basket was overflowing, spilling dirty socks and shirts across the carpet. Sarah cornered me near the stove, holding up a wrinkled, stained blouse. "Why wasn't this washed?" she demanded, glaring at me as if I had ruined her day. "You always run the darks on Wednesdays." I paused, carefully flipping a pancake on the skillet. I gave her a polite, closed-mouth smile. "We are taking care of ourselves now, remember?" I replied softly. "I am only responsible for my own things." "Fine," she huffed, storming off and slamming the laundry room door. The harsh reality of domestic labor was finally settling on her shoulders. Meanwhile, I took my breakfast to the back patio, enjoying my newly freed schedule. I opened my laptop and navigated to my private banking portal. They had grown accustomed to a lifestyle entirely subsidized by my quiet generosity, assuming the lights stayed on by magic. I clicked through my account settings, methodically removing my personal debit card from the household internet bill, the shared streaming services, and the utility auto-pays. I smiled as the confirmation screens popped up. Sarah wanted utter financial independence. She was about to discover exactly how much that cost. The silence in the house on Saturday evening was broken by a frustrated shout from the living room. I was sitting comfortably in my locked bedroom, reading a novel on my tablet, connected to the brand new personal mobile hotspot I had purchased earlier that week. Heavy footsteps approached my door, followed by a loud, urgent knock. Mom, David called out. "The internet is down, and the TV says the streaming account is suspended. Did you forget to pay the bill?" I marked my page, stood up, and opened the door just a crack. David was standing there holding the remote control, looking entirely lost. Sarah hovered behind him, her arms crossed defensively. "I didn't forget David," I explained in a calm, matter-of-fact tone. "I canceled my accounts. Since we are completely separating our finances and paying our own way, I decided to just get a personal hotspot for my tablet. It's much cheaper for just one person." Sarah pushed past his shoulder. "So what are we supposed to do for internet?" "You will have to set up your own account with the provider." I offered a mild shrug. "The router is yours if you want to use it. You just need to pay the activation fee and the monthly premium." "That's over $100 a month." Sarah snapped her face, flushing red. "I know," I replied evenly. "It's quite an expense. Have a good night." I closed the solid brass door until the lock clicked firmly into place. I walked back to my reading chair, ignoring the muffled, frantic whispering echoing through the drywall. They had spent 2 years watching movies on my dime, eating food cooked on my gas, and washing clothes in my water. The invisible safety net was officially gone, and the ground was approaching fast. The following Tuesday, David slid a printed spreadsheet under my locked bedroom door. The document was meticulously titled Household Contributions. Sarah had clearly spent hours designing it, dividing every single minor expense by 3. She had listed dish soap paper towels, trash bags, the new internet bill, and the water bill. At the very bottom, she had highlighted my exact 33% share in bright, obnoxious yellow marker. The total came out to a few $100s. I sat at my small desk, adjusting my reading glasses, and analyzed her petty mathematics. They had conveniently forgotten a few major details. Because I never bragged about money or flaunted wealth, they assumed I was scraping by. They had no idea I had quietly paid off the entire mortgage 3 years ago using my late husband's life insurance policy. Nor did they realize I covered the hefty annual property taxes and the comprehensive home insurance completely out of pocket. If Sarah wanted strict, unwavering equality, I was happy to provide the accurate data. I opened a blank spreadsheet on my computer and recreated her columns. Then I added 3 massive new rows at the bottom. Row 1, annual property taxes, prorated monthly. Row 2, homeowners, insurance, prorated monthly. Row 3, fair market, rent master, bedroom and garage parking. I divided those large numbers to reflect their 66% share of the property they were occupying. I printed the new spreadsheet, attached copies of the official tax assessments and insurance premiums, and stapled them together. I walked into the kitchen, placed the updated packet right on top of Sarah's designer purse, and went out for a long, peaceful walk. The real math was finally on the table. I was calmly scrambling an egg on the stove the next morning when Sarah stomped into the kitchen. She was holding my updated packet, her hands physically shaking with anger. David trailed behind her, looking pale and thoroughly exhausted as if he hadn't slept a wink. "What on earth is this, Catherine?" she snapped, slamming the papers onto the granite counter. "You cannot charge us rent. We are family, and these tax numbers are completely ridiculous." I turned off the burner, plated my breakfast, and turned to face them. "Family," I echoed, raising a single's eyebrow. "Family does not hand a mother a bill for dish soap and toilet paper. You explicitly stated you were done supporting me and wanted total financial separation. I am simply honoring your terms." David stepped forward, running a hand nervously through his hair. "Mom, come on. We can't afford $2,000 a month just to live here. We are trying to save for our own house." I looked at my son, feeling a brief pang of sadness for the weak man he had chosen to become. "You have lived here completely rent-free for 2 years, David." I stated plainly, keeping my emotions locked down tight. "Instead of saving your money, you bought premium golf clubs and Sarah bought designer handbags. That was your choice. My choice is to stop subsidizing your luxury lifestyle." Sarah scoffed loudly. "We absolutely will not pay this. You need us here to help take care of you." I let out a short, genuine laugh. I picked up my plate and walked past them toward the dining table. "If you choose not to pay your share of the household expenses," I replied without looking back, "you can pack your bags and leave." Over the next 2 weeks, the atmosphere in the house became incredibly hostile. Sarah stubbornly refused to acknowledge my updated invoice. She continued to buy her expensive organic groceries, hoarding them in her designated fridge space, and pointedly ignored my presence in the hallways. David avoided me, entirely leaving for work before sunrise and returning long after dark. They clearly believed that if they simply ignored the problem, I would eventually cave and return to my role as their silent, compliant provider. They severely underestimated my resolve. While they played their childish avoidance games, I was busy executing my next move. A year before David even married Sarah, I had quietly purchased a beautiful small townhouse in a quiet, tree-lined community across town. It was intended to be my future downsizing plan, and it was currently sitting empty. I started driving over there during the day, cleaning the dust and opening the windows to let the fresh air in. Back at the main house, I began slowly and methodically packing my most treasured belongings. I didn't make a dramatic scene. I didn't leave empty boxes in the hallway for them to trip over. I carefully wrapped my favorite books, antique clocks, and personal documents, placing them neatly in the trunk of my sedan. I also contacted a reputable local property management firm. I signed a standard agreement authorizing them to lease out my large 4-bedroom home at full market value. I knew David and Sarah could never pass the strict background checks or meet the income requirements to stay, especially with their mounting credit card debt. My plans were completely solidified, and I hadn't uttered a single threat. The first of the month arrived with a crisp morning breeze. I walked into the living room and placed a plain white envelope onto the center of the coffee table. Sarah and David were watching television, but David immediately muted the screen, staring cautiously at the paper. Inside the envelope was a freshly printed invoice detailing their exact monthly share of the property taxes, homeowners insurance, and fair market rent. "Payment is due today," I announced, casually checking my wristwatch. Sarah stared at the bold total at the bottom of the page, her face draining of all color. We do not have this kind of cash, Catherine. This is practically everything we have left after our car loans. How are we supposed to eat or buy gas? I offered a mild shrug mirroring the exact posture she had used on me weeks prior. That is not my concern, Sarah. You told me to support myself. I am simply asking you to do the exact same thing in the house that I own. David rubbed his temples, looking visibly panicked. Mom, please be reasonable. We made a mistake with the groceries. Let's just go back to the way things were. We'll stop splitting the small bills. I shook my head slowly. I felt absolutely no desire to return to a dynamic where I was quietly disrespected in my own sanctuary. No, David, I replied firmly. Sarah was right. Independence is vital. I have realized I highly enjoy managing my own space without feeling like a burden to you both. Sarah crossed her arms, trying desperately to regain her lost leverage. Well, we are not paying it. You will just have to deal with us staying here for free. I smiled warmly. I anticipated that response. The heavy silence in the room was absolutely deafening as they waited for my next words. They finally understood that I was not bluffing, and my boundaries were made of solid steel. I reached into my handbag and pulled out a glossy blue folder provided by the property management company. I set it gently on the coffee table, right beside their unpaid invoice. Since you cannot afford the rent and the basic household upkeep, I explained in a steady, practical tone I have decided to lease this entire house to new tenants who can. I slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a standard 30-day notice to vacate provided by the property managers. Sarah's eyes widened in sheer horror. You are kicking us out, she screamed, losing every ounce of her previous composure. Where are we supposed to go? We don't have a security deposit saved up for a new apartment. You have 30 days under the formal notice, I replied, ignoring her dramatic outburst. I am moving into my private townhouse this weekend. The management company will handle the rest of the transition. They will conduct the final walkthrough and collect your keys. David looked completely defeated, staring blankly at the formal document. He finally realized that by allowing his wife to treat his mother like a financial parasite, he had destroyed his own safety net. He had traded a comfortable, supportive home for a petty power trip that completely backfired. Mom? I am so sorry, he whispered, his voice cracking. I looked at him, feeling no anger, only a quiet sense of closure. I know you are David, but apologies do not pay the bills, I said softly. You wanted to live as completely separate adults. This is what that looks like. 6 months have passed since that fateful moving day. I am currently sitting on the quiet patio of my cozy townhouse, drinking herbal tea and watching the neighborhood birds gather around my feeder. My old large house is now rented out to a lovely family, and the rental income arrives in my bank account every single month without an ounce of drama. I recently learned through a mutual family friend that David and Sarah had to downsize drastically. They are currently renting a tiny, cramped apartment near a noisy highway intersection. Sarah was forced to pick up a second job just to cover their basic utilities, and her designer lifestyle has entirely evaporated. David called me once last month. He sounded exhausted and asked if we could meet for a quick cup of coffee to discuss fixing our relationship. I agreed, but I set very strict conditions before accepting the invitation. I told him I would happily see him, but Sarah was not welcome, and I would never, under any circumstances, discuss money or provide financial assistance ever again. He accepted those terms reluctantly, finally understanding that my boundaries were absolute and permanent. That was the harsh lesson they had refused to learn. Independence is not a weapon you use to threaten someone else. It is a heavy responsibility you must carry yourself. Sarah wanted me to stand entirely alone, so I did. And in the end, I stood stronger than ever. I no longer argue with people who mistake my quiet kindness for weakness. I simply close the door, protect my peace, and let reality finish the conversation. Looking back, the biggest takeaway for me wasn't about money or real estate. It was about the quiet power of boundaries. For a long time, I thought being a good mother meant endless sacrifice, even when it wasn't appreciated. But I realized that true self-respect sometimes means letting people face the consequences of their own choices. Independence is very easy to demand, but it's hard to afford when you're used to someone else carrying the weight. I didn't need to argue or yell to prove my point. I just needed to protect my peace. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stop doing the things people take for granted, step back, and let reality do the teaching. If this story resonated with you, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to draw a hard line to protect your own peace? Even with family, let's share our experiences down there. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel. I share new stories every week about navigating life's challenges, setting healthy boundaries, and finding your own strength. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.